plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about.
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to Farage with me, Christopher Hope. It's Thursday, the 5th of December. In recent years, we've had 6 National Policy Forum priorities, Keir Starmer's 10 leadership pledges, Labour's 5 initial missions, Labour's 6 first steps, and today, 3 foundations, 5 missions and 6 milestones. Are you keeping up at the back? But what does this government stand for? Does the government have any plan for tackling migration? A Defence Minister has issued a stark warning about the state of the UK's military and has called for a rebuild of the country's reserve forces. But will it happen? Reform UK overtakes Labour in the polls for the first time. We can exclusively reveal on Farage which Labour big names will lose their seats to Reform UK if these numbers go forward. You'll be amazed what we have to tell you. All that and more to come. But first, it's the news with Cameron Walker.
Chris, thank you. Good evening. It's 1 minute past 7. I'm Cameron Walker here in the GB newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer has once again promised to reduce immigration, but avoided setting specific targets. In a speech earlier today at Pinewood Studios, he outlined his plan for change, though immigration was absent from his 6 pledges. When pressed, the Prime Minister said the government would only tackle the issue with a serious plan, focusing on dismantling people smuggling gangs. But Reform UK has quickly criticised the lack of measurable targets. But Sir Keir Starmer argues controlling borders is still a fundamental responsibility. And in some breaking news, the Labour Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is to be knighted in the New Year Honours List, according to the Financial Times. He's expected to receive his award for political and public service after almost 2 decades in frontline politics. Other political recipients reportedly also include Labour's Emily Thornberry, who will be made a Dame, and the former Conservative Mayor of Birmingham, Andy Street, who will be knighted. The FT reports the list is yet to receive final sign-off, though, from the Prime Minister and His Majesty King Charles III. Now, French Prime Minister Michel Barnier has resigned after his government was ousted in a no-confidence vote, the first since 1962. 331 MPs backed the motion, sparked by his use of presidential powers to push through a controversial €60 billion budget without a vote. Despite the resignation, he will remain in office until a successor is appointed. President Emmanuel Macron now faces the challenge of selecting a new Prime Minister from a very divided parliament. Macron is set to address the nation later on this evening. 2 Romanian nationals have been charged after an Iranian journalist was stabbed outside his home in Wimbledon. Nandito Badia, who's 19, and George Stana, who is 23, were arrested in Romania yesterday. They are each charged with wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and wounding after Puria Zarati was knifed in the leg on the 29th of March this year. Both defendants have now appeared in a Romanian court for the start of extradition proceedings. Now, time to get into the Christmas spirit, because earlier this evening, the Trafalgar Square Christmas tree lights were turned on. Yeah, festive cheer from the crowds, despite the rain, during a special ceremony where the Royal Marine Corps of Drums and Regent's Hall Band of Salvation Army performed. The tree is a gift from Norway, something that's happened every year since 1947, and it was transported for England, and it's all to do with recognising the UK's role in supporting Norway during World War II. And hopefully they've dried off by now. Well, those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Cameron Walker. Now, back in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Christopher Hope. Yes, 3 foundations, 5 missions and 6 milestones, and I suppose a partridge in a pear tree. Well, why not? It's Christmas after all. As the PM's popularity continues to tumble, he's today unveiled more details of his so-called plan for change as he looks to reset his government.
And this is a big job. Prisons overflowing, the NHS on its knees, a £22 billion black hole in our public finances, which, to put that in context, is nearly half of what we spend on defence of our country. Now, I don't want to use that as an excuse. I expect to be judged on my ability to deal with it. And the work of change has begun.
So just to sum up, Keir Starmer there setting out a series of milestones he plans to achieve over the course of this Parliament ahead of the general election. They include higher living standards, clean power by 2030, of which has been accused of watering down that target, and an almighty pledge to cut NHS waiting lists. After Keir Starmer's speech, I caught up with some of the cabinet ministers in the audience in charge of those 6 milestones. First up, here's Ed Miliband, who has to put the UK reliant on 95% of clean power by 2030.
The whole mission, we said there will be a small strategic gas backup reserve. The National Energy System Operator a couple of weeks ago set out what a clean power system was, and this is their definition.
And nothing there about cutting bills by £300. You mentioned that in the election period, nothing in here?
It's the document says very clearly it's about lowering bills for good. We are absolutely convinced that this will lower bills.
Next up, I spoke to Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, who has to ensure that 9 out of 10 of us can get treated on the NHS within 18 weeks by the election. Will you do a big deal before Christmas and offer them money to help pay the wages of their staff? They are worried about this. All our viewers are too.
I do want to reassure GPs and others in the health service who are worried about employer national insurance contributions. Well, 2 things. Firstly, we wouldn't have raised the money for the NHS without that decision, so that's important. And secondly, I do recognise the pressures, and that will be reflected in the funding settlements. I've not announced those decisions yet, but I'm taking pressures into account when making those decisions.
That's Wes Streeting with a strong hint there. There's more money for GPs to deal with the national insurance bill for employers by Christmas. Watch this space. With me now here in the studio is Chief Political Correspondent at The Times, Aubrey Allegretti, and my panel of the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, of course, and former Labour political advisor, Susie Stride. Welcome both. Aubrey, to you first. You were in the room with me. What was the point of today?
Well, really, I think Keir Starmer has struggled since he got into office to give definition to some of his grand plans. Yes. He's talked about, a generational sort of change that he wants to institute, but really he knows that in 5 years the electorate are going to come calling, and they're not going to ask, is Britain a clean energy superpower yet? They're going to ask, have you reduced my bills, and other things like that. So he's trying to put sort of meat on the bones of his plans, give them specific metrics that they can measure him against. And I'm told this is all inspired by the sort of New Zealand model, where they have a website of about 8 or 9 sort of pledges, and you can go on and look at how the graph moves sort of day by day based on how well the government is doing against each measure. Apparently they haven't quite managed to get that far yet, but they are sort of hoping towards... Is that a dashboard? Exactly, yeah.
That you can see delivery of all these different ideas.
Yeah, and so what they want to do is basically give the British public some specific promises that they can hold them to and see day to day how the government's doing on those metrics. Now, we're not quite there yet in terms of that grand plan of dashboard, but that is the sort of overarching aim of Keir Starmer's speech today.
How do you rate then these milestones? Here's the document here published today. You know, the police one, I think we're on course to get to 13,000 more police on current trends, aren't we, I think? I mean, are they quite tough measures because they're the standards by which we'll judge them?
There's a mixture of sort of difficulty ratings, if you like, for these. And, you know, you mentioned millstones. I mean, it was slightly apt that we were at Pinewood Studios today, where I'm told they filmed Mission Impossible. And Keir Starmer was there to sort of talk about how he was trying to deliver his missions.
And James Bond, number 10 would say to you.
Exactly, yes. But obviously, there is a sort of mixed range of difficulties here. And so doing things like raising real household disposable income shouldn't be hard, considering in the last Parliament it was the first time that it had fallen backwards. So the fact that number 10 have been reluctant to put a specific metric on how much they want to raise it by suggests that actually that's probably one of the more easier pledges to fulfil. But when it does come to sort of getting up to, say, 95% of clean power by 2030, or delivering 1.5 million homes and 150 major infrastructure projects over the course of the Parliament, those are areas where they will face real difficulties if they want to have sort of trade-offs between, you know, upsetting voters potentially by building in areas and having to potentially sort of bulldoze over environmental regulation as well.
I mentioned all the different the ways they're trying to structure this approach by the government. Again, 3 foundations, 5 national missions, 6 milestones. I mean, I'm a journalist, I should explain that simply to our viewers and listeners, but it is complicated, isn't it, what they're trying to do here?
It is, and I suppose what they're trying to say is government is complicated, but it is striking, I think, to think about how this speech might have been presented by a Conservative Prime Minister.
Yes.
Because unusually we heard Keir Starmer repeatedly expressing his frustration at the sort of Whitehall movement, the civil service, what a lot of Conservatives and critics called the blob.
Yes.
And he was suggesting that he was really struggling to sort of be able to enact the policies that he wants to. And in some ways, going into the room today, it felt like going into exactly the same room 8 months ago, before the election, when Labour were in campaigning mode.
Yes.
So they've got to figure out how to drive a lot of the things they want to do into actual delivery in government.
I remember Francis Moore saying the same thing as David Cameron back in the 2010s. It goes on. He wants to use AI, doesn't he, to deliver lots of this. He says the more you are in Whitehall, the more frustrated he's getting with the slow pace of progress. He also, I think, has looked back at Tony Blair's first term and noted the lack of measurable milestones then delayed the delivery of the Blair plan. So perhaps he's learning a lesson now.
Yeah, I think 5 years will pass incredibly quickly for this Labour government, and they will realise that the electorate is snapping at their heels when the time of the next election comes around. So they want to set these targets not just for civil servants, not just for the public, but also for ministers. And there has been a little bit of toing and froing, allegedly, ministers saying we're slightly, unnervy about potentially being asked to do something that we're not sure we can fulfil, or indeed having these targets set before next year's spending review. The comprehensive spending review for 3 years has been set.
2% cut, isn't it, in budget? Is that right, from the budget?
And and they're not entirely sure yet because, we haven't seen the details of it. But effectively, they feel like their hands are being tied. They're being told, you must deliver these things, but we haven't given you the budget to guarantee you'll be able to do it yet.
In my question to the PM, I asked him, will any of this cost more in big tax rises? He didn't answer the question. Is that a worry?
He did seem to sort of signal that he didn't want to, if you like, put more of a sort of tax pressure on the British people. But, talk is cheap. And I heard exactly the same slogan from Conservative Prime Ministers as well. So Rachel Reeves seemed to sort of try and go that far last week and then seemed to row back from it. We're going to need some very concrete answers from them before we trust them completely.
Aubrey, thank you. To our panel now, Susie Stryden and Kelvin Mackenzie. Kelvin, what's your take on this plan for change? You must have seen a lot of these things launched in your time in newspapers.
It's a complete waste of space. I mean, already the councils have said that 1.5 million is for the birds. They have this idea.
New homes.
Yeah, the idea that you'll be able to ring up your local police officer, who in Weybridge High Street, I have never seen one in 20 years. The idea that you'll be able to call somebody up and say, I'm sorry, what's happened to my lawnmower, or where's
it might be a WhatsApp group. You can WhatsApp him. You know how the modern world works.
Yeah, look, if any of these things happen, I'll be astonished. Politicians are held to account very quickly now, and I'm afraid that Starmer will turn out to be probably one of the worst of our Prime Ministers, not one of the
We're only 5 months into the day. Susie Stride, give the guy a break. I mean, he's trying to show us, he's trying to let us judge his performance, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you probably won't be surprised to know that I don't agree with that. I actually, look, crime, you know, crime has gone up in the last 14 years. I've worked frontline, you know, in that field, and you can see it. You don't have to be, you know, a rocket scientist or any kind of expert to see crime has gone up. There's been less police, you know, on the streets. We're going to change that. Labour are going to change that, and I actually feel, you know, I feel very excited. I mean, whether these things are good or bad, you know, in life we set goals and targets. I think it's okay to do this, and I think for some people this is the way their brains work, and it's helpful. For me, I think we're going to get to the end of this 5 years. This country is going to be in a better place. There are going to be more homes. Crime is going to come down. Schools are going to be... I've, again, worked in schools for 20 years. Schools are going to be in a better place. You know, people are going to be able to get their GP appointments. I'm not saying, you know, we're going to solve everything. It's, you know, I'm sure we're going to talk about immigration in a minute. But I think this is more positive than what often the right-wing press love to say.
We'll come on to immigration and what wasn't in there, which was immigration, shortly. I mean, we heard, didn't we, Aubrey, from the PM, he wants us to land with a thud of a gauntlet in a Whitehall desk. He said that rather in an Alan Partridge way, didn't he, in that speech? Will it work? I mean, he knows he's got to try and whip the system bend it to his will, and this is the document to do it.
Well, it's only 44 pages, although it is nearly, I think, 2 months really in the making. I've been writing about the sort of plan for change since, I think, mid-October. So there is certainly an effort to sort of give some oomph to this drive, but whether or not it can really sort of bend the very sort of inherent structures in the civil service to their whims. I think they're really struggling with that more than they're maybe letting on. And actually, the civil service sometimes doesn't respond too well to being criticised. You can have elements of it sort of turn against you.
Yeah, Calvin, they're doing their best here, aren't they?
I honestly, if the last 5 months is an indication of what the next 4 years and 7 months, and let's hope it collapses before then, is what we face. It is going to be an absolute nightmare. I've never seen any government, and by the way, I'm even talking about some of the Boris successes, I've never seen any government collapse so early in my life. And
hasn't collapsed, still going.
Well, when you say it's going, every time they announce something, something goes wrong. I mean, we're at the beginning of this. Can somebody explain to me why they needed to actually put it like this? This is a bunch of journalists.
That's a good question.
What is the point of 44 pages?
Why on earth is this government doing this after 5 months, not doing it on day one?
Can I just... Look, there's a few things for me. I know, I mean, we keep all saying this. It's 5 months, and I have no problem with saying it's only 5 months. We've just had 14 years of a depressing Conservative government, closing libraries, closing youth clubs, NHS waiting times going through the roof. I can't work out why there is so much pessimism. Let's give Labour a chance. Honestly, I'm fascinated to see in 2 years' time. Do you know what? We know what I love about someone like West Streeting. He's going to do the business. There's no way that man is not going to do the business on the NHS.
Porridge?
Yes, by regulating
I have porridge every morning.
Do you know what?
Look at me. Anyway, I've never been fitter.
I'm so glad that we're finally regulating the food companies. How much taxpayers' money is wasted
Thank you. Calorie counting doesn't work. And
Calvin, that's enough. Thank you, Calvin.
Banning
Thank
porridge.
you, Calvin. Thank you, Susie, and thank you to Aubrey and my panel. I'll be singing again shortly. I should say I tried to speak. There was one cabinet minister who didn't want to speak to me today, Angela Rayner. Here's what happened.
Angela Rayner, for GB News, Angela Rayner, can I ask you one question? Angela Rayner, we talked GB News.
With the whole of
young
Labour.
Children get a picture, please. Thank you so much. Angela, just one for GB News, one question. Sadly, Angela Rayner not wanting to talk to GB News there. We're trying to ask questions about her plan for change, but sadly, other broadcasters came first.
There we are, Angela Rayner. She had other things to do, and no problem here. Always keen to talk to her whenever she can come on GB News. Coming up next, we've heard what Keir Starmer announced, but what did he leave out? Find out after the break.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Well, drinkers have been warned about a drop in the quality of French wines after poor weather conditions hit this year's grape harvest. Winemakers across France will make 240 million fewer bottles of wine this year, the country's farming ministry said on Tuesday. So should we think of switching from French to English? I'm joined now by sommelier and founder of Inflorescence Wines, Jacinta Madison-Williams. Hello, Jacinta.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. First of all, let's just think about the poor French. Has this been a fairly universal weather catastrophe for France?
It has. Kind of across the board, we're about 22% down on last year's crops.
which is quite significant. I think it's like one of the 4 years over the last century that have been this low. So,
and it's affected both quality and quantity?
I would say more so quantity. There's always ways of counteracting quality. It depends if people are desperate to make wine. They can obviously push out more watered down grapes. There's been a lot of rain, if you hadn't noticed. Not only in France, we felt it here too. But lots of frost, supercell hailstorms have completely wiped out some crops. So in some cases, there's nothing to make. In other cases, it's just really watered down grapes and you want to pick earlier to make sure you're avoiding all those rains. But I would say more so it's quantity. But saying that, France is still the biggest producer of wine in the world. It might be taken over by Spain this year, but as a consumer, don't panic. We're not going to run out of wine. And we obviously have lots of lovely wine growing here now in England. So whether we do make a little jump for a bit to English wine, but there's definitely still lots out there.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel. Welcome back to Farage with me, Christopher Hope. Sir Keir Starmer has set out his plan for change, outlining his government's 6 milestones, which it will deliver by the next election. But he left out what we think, and many voters think, is a big one: migration. Rather than a hard target, the plan for change only committed the government to reducing legal and illegal migration. It was an issue that I pressed the PM on earlier. Your plan is to reduce net migration and reduce overall small boat crossings. GB News viewers will be saying simply, is that it, Prime Minister? Why can't you stop the boats and cut non-migration to under 100,000? Is it because you can't or you don't want to?
We are going to drive down migration, both legal and illegal. The only way to make it work is to smash the gangs that are running the vile trade, and that's why we've invested so much in setting up the command that is needed to do that, and with the enforcement action that follows through. And as you know, there was a very significant arrest just the other week in relation to the work that we are doing. That is how you do it. That is serious. That is a government that absolutely is getting to grips with this.
Shortly afterwards, I took up the same issue with the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
We say very clearly in the plan for change that we need to bring down legal migration and bring down illegal migration. We've seen legal migration soar. We've seen this fourfold increase in overseas recruitment at a time when training in the UK has been cut. Well, that is just a broken system. And we also are setting out the further action on going after the criminal gangs.
Joining me now to discuss this is the former Labour MP, Khalid Mahmood. Khalid, great to see you on Farage tonight. What is the point? What is the point of this document? Why has this not come out during the election campaign?
Well, the government has time now to settle and look at some of the issues that it needs to deal with. Obviously, there are commitments made before the manifesto, and you'll find by and large, these aren't too much away from what the manifesto said. And basically, after having looked at the books, having looked at the £22 billion gaping hole in the finances, the Prime Minister has come out now and saying, look, I want to address these issues and this is how I'm going to do it. And this is what we're going to do. It's going to be a solid plan of delivery from now on.
Do you worry that the targets, the milestones are a bit easy? 13,000 police on current trends, they were going to get there anyway, possibly. 95% of clean power by 2030, no longer 100%. Young three-quarters of 5-year-olds being ready to learn when they get to school. That may have come back after COVID. Do you not think these are quite limited in their scope?
No, I don't think they're limited. I think, look, what we talk about in terms of 13,000 police is that this is not the only thing that we're going to do in terms of that. We're going to increase that. We're going to put more effort into it. And that is the starting point of what we're going to deliver in the near term. But I'm sure that we'll go on forward to deal with all of the delivery that's very important and make sure we can move on with that.
Do you worry, though, that this may involve more taxes or more spending cuts? We're looking forward into this, what could be quite a brutal spending round of Whitehall departments. They'll be expected to cut maybe 2% off their budgets. It might be a problem here going forward for Labour and, in fact, for anyone relying on public services.
Well, no, look, I think both the Chancellor has committed, particularly in terms of that there'll be no more rises. The Prime Minister's in line with that. We've got to cut our cloth to meet our needs. Therefore, there has to be savings in some of the departments to be able to move forward. And there has to be other investment from the private sector, which, as you know, is very important. And what we want to do is put all that together and move forward. This can't be just a sort of growth based on taxes. It has to be a growth on moving forward, getting more private investment in and moving together to move forward.
Well, Khalid Mahmood, thank you for joining us tonight on Farage. And joining me now in the studio here in Westminster is Richard Tice, Reform MP and the Deputy Leader, of course, of Reform UK. Richard Tice, you must be licking your lips here. This cutting net migration, cutting illegal migration is nowhere near what you're offering in your prospectus.
Well, I mean, this speech, this reset by the Prime Minister today was only notable in the fact that it meant nothing, said nothing, and was completely unmemorable. Nobody's going to be going to the pub tonight saying, oh, I remember that great phrase and I believe that great target and he's going to sort the country out. And he completely ignored, until you asked him the question, the key issue which is damaging our country so much and making us all poorer financially and the quality of services, which is legal and illegal immigration. We had the figures last week increased by the ONS by 250,000 to almost 1 million people in 1 year. In the year just gone, it's another 750,000. These numbers are off the chart, and the Prime Minister is basically saying that's broadly OK.
Well, he's not. He just isn't saying that, because I was there in the press conference last week.
But he didn't give you any target. But that was last week. But when you asked him again this week, he was all soft and woolly and wishy-washy. He said, well, he'd like to bring it down.
It says here we want to reduce overall small boat crossings. We want to reduce net migration. What they won't give is a figure. Your figure is 1 in, 1 out, net zero. But your figure is at the other end of the spectrum, completely, ridiculously undeliverable.
The reason we're going up on the polls, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is because people are sick and tired of waffle, wishy-washy garbage from politicians who won't put their neck on the line and say, I'm actually going to do this and it's going to happen. And people are just sick and tired.
Perhaps it's harder than you think.
No, the truth is...
Let me finish. It's very easy in business to apply that mind to Whitehall, but I've seen countless business people crash on the rocks of the civil service. It's not that easy as you make out.
I completely disagree. Actually, I think what you do need is successful business people running the country, telling the civil service, we're going to do this, and if you don't join in the belief that we're going to do this, go and get a different job, because the country is sick and tired of it. And what we've actually seen is decades of failure by mainstream politicians, and it's unacceptable. It's having a huge impact.
Is it not the case, though, that the Keir Starmer's style, the kind of catchphrase individual, he's not that person. He's one who delivers, look at my works, not how I talk.
Yeah, let's look at his works. Look at it. He's responsible for the blunder budget, which means people are laying off hundreds of thousands of people. You've got the steel industry in trouble. You've got the car industry in trouble. The economy is in fundamental trouble.
The NHS needs the money, therefore they've found it. Is that right?
No, it's wrong. It's completely wrong. Doctors and nurses write to me when I talk about the waste and the mismanagement of the NHS and say, Richard, you're bang on the money. The NHS does not need more money. It needs quality management, and we've got to do healthcare differently in this country. You've got to introduce some competition. It's a good thing. It makes everybody perform better. You've got to use the independent sector much more for those who can afford it.
I think West Riding is doing that, by the way. He is using
He's talked about it.
Talking about
I'm going to challenge him on it.
OK. There was a poll out tonight from Find Out Now, which is setting tongues wagging here in Westminster. The Tories on 26%, they're ahead. But Reform in second place on 24%, ahead of Labour, which is extraordinary. Your reaction?
It is remarkable. We've got three parties polling in the mid-20s.
You've got 5
We're delighted,
MPs.
and we're delighted with it because what it shows is we've got the momentum. People are listening to what we've just been talking about on immigration. They trust us to get to net zero immigration. They trust us to stop the boats. We've got a clear plan to deliver it, and they trust us on the economy. And I think that people are saying, look, all of the other lot, they've tried, they've failed, they've blown it. Starmageddon in 5 months has just become an absolute catastrophe. And people are saying...
It's not, though, is it? I mean...
It is a catastrophe. Look, we just touched on the jobs are going, the confidence is going, the growth is slipping, the debt is rising. We're heading to a very bad place. And already now, lots of people are saying she's going to have to raise taxes. Rachel from Accounts is going to have to raise taxes next year or the year after, having just seen the biggest tax raising.
The PM wouldn't answer that question today.
Well, there you are. And that's because they're worried about it.
These numbers, though, are extraordinary. Let's look at numbers of MPs gained based on this. One poll, you're smiling like a Cheshire cat here, because Reform get 95 MPs off this, apparently. Tories on 219, Labour on 207. A hung Parliament, which would probably create a Lib Dem-Labour alliance. You're helping Labour into a second term by doing so well in the polls.
We're only 5 months in. Look at the progress we've made. 14% of the general election, 24% now. Within a year, that momentum will be growing. We're probably going to be polling first. That's something to look forward to. A nice Christmas present.
Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, thank you for joining us tonight on GB News with that news on your poll. Now, during Advent, as we count down the Christmas day, we are hearing from church ministers across the country. Each day, they have a very special message for you to celebrate the festive season.
The GB News Advent Calendar, Day 5.
Hi, it's Josh from the Send, UK and Ireland. Do you feel you need renewal in your life? Imagine a barren garden in winter, its branches appearing lifeless. Yet with spring, life bursts forth, blossoms bloom, and the garden transforms into life. The prophet Isaiah speaks of the branch of the Lord as a beautiful and glorious vision of renewal. Christmas is like spring for our souls. It's a time when God, through Jesus, brings life to what feels barren within us. Perhaps this year has left us tired, even hopeless. Yet, the message of Christmas is that renewal is possible. Like a gardener, God nurtures us, planting seeds of hope and life and peace and love through Jesus. Let this season be your call to renew again. What in your life needs God's renewal today? Merry Christmas.
Wasn't that just marvellous? And you can see all of our special Advent messages as Christmas approaches by going to gbnews.com/Advent. Coming up next, I'll be speaking to a former Defence Minister on Labour claims that a major war could destroy the army in just 6 months.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Some wet and windy weather is expected over the next few days. First of all, overnight, and then after that clears on Friday, Storm Dara arrives later in the day. So we've got one low moving through at the moment, then another low turning up Friday night. That Storm Dara expected to bring significant impacts on Saturday in many parts of the UK. But we end Thursday with the first area of low pressure clearing through, so turning drier and clearer overnight, although the winds staying gusty. And we start Friday with a chill in the air, actually, because the wind will be bringing colder air in from the northwest, but plenty of bright blue skies, and most places will be dry first thing, calm before the storm arrives. So Plenty of sunshine on offer across the UK early Friday, a decent start, feeling chilly in the wind, and a few showers coming into the northwest of England, parts of Northern Ireland, more especially western and northern Scotland. But away from the showers, some decent sunny spells. The best of the sunshine in Scotland will be across eastern and southern parts. Otherwise, the cloud will be coming and going. Then it turns cloudy and breezy across Northern Ireland through the morning. The first sign of Storm Dara, but it's really around lunchtime that the rain turns up, and that rain will turn heavy through the afternoon, pushing into western Scotland, Wales and the southwest of England, accompanied by a strengthening wind. Meanwhile, we keep the fine and bright weather in the east of the UK, temperatures reaching 7 or 8 Celsius. It's a different story for Saturday, with wet and windy weather across the whole of the country. Spells of rain pushing through, accompanied by an increasingly strong wind. The risk of 60 miles an hour wind gusts widely, and the risk across some western parts of the UK of 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts. That's why there's an amber warning in force for western areas, and it's worth staying up to date with all the latest forecasts.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about.
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Christopher Hope. Now, Sir Keir Starmer's plan for change, out today, does not include a deadline for spending 2.5% of our GDP on defence. But perhaps it should, because today there was a chilling warning from the Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin. Overnight, he said that the world faces a third nuclear age. And speaking at the Royal United Services Institute lecture, he said China now poses a major threat to the West. That came hours after Veterans Minister Alan Carnes warned the British Army will be destroyed in 6 months to a year if it had to fight Russia. Joining me to discuss these very worrying and stark warnings is former Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, welcome to Farage on GB News. Great to see you.
Good evening to you.
Are you surprised by these warnings?
Well, in your introduction, you've covered a lot there, so just let me reflect a little bit. I mean, back in 2019, I first called for an increase in defence spending to 3%. And even then, it was clear that this period of relative peace since the end of the Cold War was now over. Our world was already beginning to splinter into two spheres of competing influence, with China and Russia challenging the West and becoming ever more aggressive, ever more assertive. And now, 4 years later, our world continues to get more dangerous, not less. Conflict is spreading across the world. Authoritarianism is on the rise. The threat picture gets ever more complex. And as our world continues to fracture into two, as global order slowly breaks down, yet our defense posture has changed little. Our army, our navy, our air force are woefully too small to match the growing threats that we face. And we've failed to appreciate how the actual character of conflict has changed, how our enemies are causing us severe harm from afar. I choose my words really carefully here. We are already at war with Russia and China, a grey zone war, which we are currently not winning. Our undersea data cables are snapped by Chinese fishing vessels deliberately dragging their anchors. Not a week goes by when there isn't a major cyber attack on government departments, or businesses and so forth. And there's a constant barrage of disinformation in our social media.
Tobias,
so I'm seriously concerned, if I may, just to say that will it take a major grey zone attack on Britain for us to really wake up and recognise that we need to spend 3% on our defence, or we will suffer immensely given the threat picture we now face.
Tobias, we know those warnings. We heard them today from the Minister and from the Army Chief. This document, again, this plan for change, which Labour's put out today, it doesn't commit to a date for hitting to 2.5% of GDP. It says they will set out a path to that level in the spring. Is that worrying you? Is that soon enough?
I couldn't have spelled it out more. Is it going to take a major cyber attack on Britain for us to reflect the fact that we are now defenceless in so many areas? I mean, just look at how we've dropped our defence posture. At the end of the Cold War, we had, I think, 1,200 Challenger battle tanks. Today, we're down to 148. We had 60 frigates and destroyers. We're down to 15 today. And we had 40 fast jet squadrons, and now we're down to just 7. But as I stress, it's these other domains of warfare, cyber and space and so forth, that we are starting to lose already. And how Russia and China are exploiting our timidity. We should not have allowed Russia to advance so much over 2 years in Ukraine. We should have put that fire out. And it's probably going to take Donald Trump arriving in the White House to turn to Europe and say, you need to look after European security. You need to spend more on defense. And I would like to see Britain step forward to be the first nation to say NATO's defense spending should increase to 2.5%, and we're going to start with that.
We'll wait and see in that spending review. Tobias Elwood, thank you for joining us tonight on Farage. And joining me now in the studio is my panel of the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the former Labour political advisor, Susie Stride. Susie, to you first. Will Labour keep us safe? From that account, from the Minister and the Army Chief, many are worried.
Yeah, look, I think Keir Starmer has made it very clear that this is a key priority for him. And I think, look, unfortunately, in the last 14 years, you know, the Conservatives didn't invest in the way they should have done, actually, in the defence budget in this country. And even, you know, their own ministers and their own backbenchers, you know, criticised them for that. And I don't think Keir Starmer is going to make that mistake. I think, you know, whether or not this was an electoral winner, which actually I do think it is very important to the British public, especially with what we've going on. I mean, as been said, you've got Russia, you've got China. The world, in many ways, is more uncertain now than it was 10 years ago. But even if it was an electoral win, though, I think, as I say, it's important to the British public. I think Keir Starmer knows this is important, and that investment is going to increase.
Kelvin Mackenzie, do you trust Labour on defence?
No, I don't. But I don't trust the Tories either. I mean, Cameron set this whole schema rolling. Look at the numbers.
Back in 2010, with that when
he couldn't give a damn about it. The man's a complete idiot. I mean, you know, a total idiot, as you can see.
He would deny that.
From running the country and also from what he invested. But so the Chinese army is 2.5 million. The Russian army is 1.5 million. The Ukraine army is 275,000. And we are just under 80,000, the smallest that anybody can ever remember. We need to... I totally buy what Trump says. It's your nation. It's your land.
Do you want to see conscription here?
We are going to need subscription. Now, this will be a wake-up call, won't it? And I say if we're going to move to 2.5% to 3%, we're going to have to cut benefits. That will cheer me up. It's a win-win.
Would Labour do that? Cut benefits to boost defence?
Look, again...
Where's the money going to come from, though?
Again, look, we've been in for 5 months, do you know what I mean? You know, but I don't think that needs to happen. I think there's lots of things, you know, that the UK government can begin to do. But again, as I've said, Keir Starmer has made it very, very clear that we are going to invest in defence, that this is a key priority for us.
But he won't say it yet, will he? He'll set out a path to 2.5% in the new year. I mean, we're nowhere near that number, are we? And Kelvin, he's worried about the future of this country.
Yeah, and I think, do you know what? And I think it is right, I think, to feel that worry with, again, you know, as has just been pointed out by the previous Conservative minister there, you know, Russia, China, and I think British people read those things and think, what on earth? Why do we let them get away with this?
They're going to have to pay for it. So instead of giving it to train drivers, why don't we increase the size of our standing army or even our tanks?
And the benefits bill would suffer. Well, that's
indeed.
A talking
I would
point.
cut it in a heartbeat.
I think there's lots of ways to bring it down.
Thank you for joining us again. Stay here. Don't go anywhere. You won't want to miss the next item on this show. We'll reveal which Labour big names might lose their seats to Reform UK, according to a poll out tonight. It will send shivers from your spine here all the way to Downing Street. Stay tuned.
is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, let's speak now to Sales Director at Savills for Quinta Properties, Raquel Santos, who is live for us in Portugal. Raquel, good to see you this morning. Why are all these celebrities flocking to Portugal all of a sudden?
Yeah, I guess it's just because of basically the great lifestyle that we have, security, you know. Portugal has kind of been a hidden, tucked away gem for quite a while that people didn't realize existed. And with the international flights that, you know, with the American flights coming in, it's kind of been put back on the map as a country that's worth visiting and worth investing in due to the secure investments that we offer in real estate.
Raquel, is it anything to do with tax rates? Because I think capital gains tax is, I think if it's over a certain amount, you pay half of your rate, which is 28%. Capital gains on shares and cryptocurrencies is 0. Is it anything to do with that? Because over here in the UK, big storm at the moment about millionaires apparently leaving in exodus because of the mooted increases in taxes in just a few weeks.
Yes, so obviously the alterations that are happening with the UK in terms of the tax that's being implemented on the capital gains, as you mentioned, we've definitely noticed has become a big drive, mostly on the vendor side as well, who are looking to sell because they don't want to be hit, you know, with these higher capital gains, which is close to coming into effect.
Raquel, have you noticed then millionaires, high net worth people from the UK getting in touch with you looking to relocate?
Definitely. It's for multiple reasons, obviously, the changes that are due to come into place, obviously, and Portugal just seems to be a safe option always when things do kind of change. People opt to come into Portugal because we're quite steady, we're quite stable.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Christopher Hope. Now, a new poll shows that Nigel Farage's Reform UK party has overtaken Labour, the governing party, for the first time. The research from Find Out Now gives Reform 24% ahead of Labour on 23% and behind the opposition Tory party on 26%. And this translates, if there were an election today, into 95 MPs for Reform UK at the next general election. Now, I know it's just one poll and polls are often wrong, but this is very interesting. With me now to discuss the findings and reveal which Labour big beast could be put to the sword by Farage's army is Martin Baxter, the founder of Electoral Calculus. Martin, welcome to Farage.
Good evening, Chris.
Great to see you. Give us the detail then. Which big beast, which Labour cabinet ministers would fall if this poll was reflected accurately at an election?
Yes, it's a fascinating poll, isn't it, from Find Out Now. The first one which puts Reform in second place ahead of the Labour Party. And if that were to happen, as you say, it's just one poll, but if it were to happen, then about half of Labour MPs would lose their seats. Almost exactly half, including some big names like Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister,
right.
Wes Streeting, and Yvette Cooper, to name just a few, but and a lot of other Labour MPs as well. So if this were to happen, it would be very noteworthy. But of course, it's worth giving two caveats. One, there isn't going to be an election tomorrow, as far as we know. And two, this is just one poll. And if it's always good to look at a poll of polls, which do show a similar situation, though not quite as awful for Labour as this poll. but we'll have to wait and see how things develop.
Other names there, Bridget Phillips, the Education Secretary, Chris Bryant, or Sir Chris Bryant, he's the Minister of State in the Culture Department, and Kim Leadbeater, of course, who's pushing this assisted dying bill at the moment. Big worries there for Labour, and the March of Reform UK, 100,000 members, they tell us, and just 5 MPs goes on. Just this week, Nigel Farage was at a dinner in London full of journalists and politicos, and he said, although he's newcomer of the year, in a few years' time, there'll be lots of me, dozens of newcomers from Reform UK in Parliament.
Well, yes, I think there's two important things to remember. Firstly, that there's more marginal seats in this Parliament than there have been in decades. And most of those are Labour seats. So there's many Labour MPs who have relatively small majorities, and they may be becoming increasingly nervous if this polling continues for the months to come. The second thing, of course, is, we know polls are polls, and they're not a bad guide, but there's nothing like an election. And we do have an election coming up, not a general election, but the county council elections in May next year. And it'll be very interesting there to see whether Reform do as well as the polls suggest, and whether Labour do as badly. The Conservatives obviously were expecting difficulties in that next year, because that was compared with the high point of 2001 when they were doing quite well in the polls. So all three parties will have quite a lot to prove in May when the actual ballots are cast. But at the moment, all we've got are the polls, and the polls are bad for Labour. Labour seem to be having their midterm blues have come very early, just 5 months to the day since Keir Starmer became Prime Minister.
Well, maybe this document, this plan for change, which we heard about from Labour, might lift them in the polls. We'll wait and see. Thank you, Martin Baxter, for crunching those numbers for us at Electoral Calculus. Now, joining me in the studio, still here, is the former editor of The Sun, Calvin Mackenzie, and the former Labour political advisor, Susie Stride, and also Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. I must ask you about this poll and Reform UK. But to you first, Calvin, you were applauding some of those big names falling at the sword of Reform UK.
What a great moment. Angela Rayner getting thrown out, Mahmood getting thrown out, Wes Streeting, Yvette Cooper. Honestly, I can't take too much of
What's your problem with them? They're doing their best. They're elected on a fair election.
It's not good enough. I've seen them for 5 months. The idea I've got to sit here for 5 years is a really upsetting experience.
I think you'll have to. The election won't be this tomorrow or even next week. For 5 years, you're stuck with these people.
The electoral calculus bloke made a very good point. I expect Reform to do very well in those county council elections. One, for historical reasons, because the Tories did very well 4 years previously, but also there is a gathering movement against conventional two-party politics, and Nigel Farage is an immaculate politician of a quality which the Conservative Party would kill to have right now.
Well, on that note, Susie Stride, what's your take on these polls? I mean, Labour, you'll see they're losing half their seats.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I think, first of all, it's very important that we have a healthy, measured concern for reform, And what I would say is, look, they are very good at speaking the language of the people, and also kind of getting where, especially working class people and in those marginal seats, where people are at. And, we can't be snobby about that, and we can't look down upon that, and we definitely can't just dust it off. We have to take that very seriously.
Yep.
However, this is one poll, 4.5 years off the next general election.
Yes.
This is what I would call, within a Reform Tory bubble, something that everyone can clap and get excited about. The rest of the country, I'm sorry, I would not be taking this seriously at all.
Well, that result there actually gives us a Labour-Lib Dem coalition after the next election, which we've been there before with coalitions, and no one likes them much in this country.
Yeah, I mean, look, I just think that this is one poll. I do not see this happening. But I do look. There's two things. We've got to take where people are at seriously. People do not feel listened to. They don't feel politics represent them. They feel like people like Nigel Farage understands them. It's on us to change that. But do I think that that's going to be a reality? No.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, you're here. You've talked before about some deal with Reform and the Tories. This makes the point.
This is a stunning result for Reform. Most second-tier parties, after a general election, get completely forgotten about, and their polling declines. Reform has been putting on support since the general election. That is extremely unusual. The Lib Dems usually fade away, and the Greens usually fade away after elections. People think about Tory and Labour. It's very strong for Reform. County elections is going to be tremendously important.
Welsh elections after that.
And the Welsh elections, that's right. There is momentum for Reform. But this, 219 and 95, Tories and Reform, plus DUP getting very close to being able to form a coalition.
Extraordinary. Would you ever think of joining Reform UK?
No, I'm Tory to my fingertips.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Everyone says that till they join.
That's perfectly true. That's a fair point for you to make. But I am very Tory.
I'm going to ask you about your show tonight. It sounds exciting.
Well, very excitingly, I've got an interview with Frederick Forsyth. I went to see him on Monday to talk about, among other things, the new film of his most famous film, The Day of the Jackal, which had Edward Fox in it first time round, and a new one come out, and his fascinating life story and what he did behind the Iron Curtain and how he pretended to be dumb to fool the Stasi, which worked perfectly, and he picked up tidbits of information which he passed on as a runner for...
He's a very wise man. He used to do a great spot on the Radio 4's Today programme, alternating with Will Self, with some quite interesting points about life.
He's very interesting politically. He's certainly on the right of the Conservative Party. Perhaps I don't know if he's in Reform, but he's very much a Eurosceptic, very much dislikes the bureaucratic state of the EU.
Kelvin Mackenzie and Cecilia Stride. Should Jacob Rees-Mogg join Reform UK?
I don't actually see Jacob joining Reform. He wouldn't do it. He'd be a great asset for them. And that's not to say that he wouldn't take a post in a merged Tory Reform.
And Susie Quigley?
But you just got to stay true to your values, and if you're a Tory, stay a Tory.
Coming up next, State of the Nation with that man, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. But first, it's the weather on GB News with Aidan McGibbon.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Some wet and windy weather is expected over the next few days. First of all, overnight, and then after that clears on Friday, Storm Dara arrives later in the day. So we've got one low moving through at the moment, then another low turning up Friday night. That Storm Dara expected to bring significant impacts on Saturday in many parts of the UK. But we end Thursday with the first area of low pressure clearing through, so turning drier and clearer overnight, although the winds staying gusty. And we start Friday with a chill in the air, actually, because the wind will be bringing colder air in from the northwest, but plenty of bright blue skies, and most places will be dry first thing, calm before the storm arrives. So plenty of sunshine on offer across the UK early Friday, a decent start, feeling chilly in the wind, and a few showers coming into the northwest of England, parts of Northern Ireland, more especially western and northern Scotland. But away from the showers, some decent sunny spells. The best of the sunshine in Scotland will be across eastern and southern parts. Otherwise, the cloud will be coming and going. Then it turns cloudy and breezy across Northern Ireland through the morning. The first sign of Storm Dara, but it's really around lunchtime that the rain turns up, and that rain will turn heavy through the afternoon, pushing into western Scotland, Wales and the southwest of England, accompanied by a strengthening wind. Meanwhile, we keep the fine and bright weather in the east of the UK, temperatures reaching 7 or 8 Celsius. It's a different story for Saturday, with wet and windy weather across the whole of the country.